You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Cathy Zane.
You can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com, and while you're there, please click on the subscribe links over in the right-hand sidebar. You can subscribe on your Android phone, your iPhone, it's Stitcher Radio, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find Author Stories. We're also on YouTube. There's a link over in the right-hand sidebar as well, and you can subscribe there and never miss an episode. Today's episode is sponsored by the AIPP, the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals. If you are an indie author and you need to build a support team to help you format your book, edit your book, get a cover designed for your book, anything that an indie author needs to get their book out there, the AIPP has a member that can help you make your book, your product, the very best it can be. If you look in the show notes at the bottom of this episode, you'll find a link to the AIPP, or go to aipponline.org/members and browse through the member library and find the professional to fill out your team. Like I said, anything that you need to make your indie publishing journey a success, there's a member there to help. It's a very simple website, very easy to navigate through. Go check out aipponline.org/members today and fill out your indie author team. At the end of the show, be sure to stick around for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thanks for listening. He enlisted for the money. He stayed for the girl. Gateway to the Galaxy, the new series everyone is talking about, beginning with Book 1, Into the Breach. Frank and Marine Space Corps 1 find themselves across the galaxy in a WWE smackdown with the legions of a boss-level villain. But the party's just getting started. He donned the mantle of a celestial knight to impress a girl, well, an empress. Now destiny's calling in a debt. A lightning-paced military fantasy full of outlandish comedy and impossible situations that will have you hailing for these Marines from the get-go. For fans of Green Lantern and the Stargate universe. Listen to what some readers are saying. This is good stuff. Thanks for the new obsession. I recommend and can't wait for the next book. And the visual pictures and action are amazing. They're getting the band back together. And this time, it's serious nonsense. Pick up the Gateway to the Galaxy series by Jonathan Yanez and J.R. Castle, available now on Amazon.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. Gateway to the Galaxy. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Cathy Zane on the show with me. She has a phenomenal new book called Better Than This, and I think you guys are really going to love it. Welcome to the show, Cathy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. We've got a lot to talk about, but before we do, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, unlike many writers, I don't have a clear childhood memory of wanting to be a writer. I loved stories and reading. I still have my grade school report cards, and my sixth grade teacher recorded how many books we read over the course of the year, and I read 67 books. So I was clearly the girl with her nose in the book most of the time. But writing I didn't come to writing until later in life. Probably my mid 30s, I would say.
We know a lot of people do have the story that, that they were 4 years old and knew that they would be, a famous novelist. And that's all wonderful. But that's not the only story that there is. There's been a lot of folks who, kind of don't have that awakening until later in life. And both are valid. We all come to it when we come to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what did you said that you first kind of thought about that in your mid-30s. What were you doing, professionally, before then?
So I have had a couple careers. I was a nurse, actually worked in labor and delivery for about 15 years, and then went back to graduate school around my mid-30s in psychology. I got really interested in sort of mind-body connection and was doing some personal work of my own. And that's how I came to start writing, was actually through journaling. I had read Julia Cameron's The Artist Way and started doing morning pages and loved putting my pen to the paper. I loved how it opened up my creativity and writing and thinking. And so that's how I started.
I think that's a powerful tool for a lot of people to be introduced to the idea that they can collect their thoughts and put it down in a way that, and I think for most of us that do some journaling, it's for ourselves and never really meant to be shared with anyone other than just kind of storytelling to ourselves, if you will. And by storytelling, I don't mean writing fiction. I mean, collecting the events and putting them in some sort of narrative that makes sense to us. How long did you do that before you started maybe picking up on, that there's more to this than just, kind of cataloging my day? Right.
Well, I found as I wrote, I started to have characters and plot lines start to float into my journaling. It was really interesting. I actually started doing some nonfiction writing, as a therapist, started writing a little bit about personal growth. I had some articles and newsletters for parenting, those kinds of things, but then started having, like I said, characters and the story idea come in. And so I read more. I read Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird and several other writing books, and ended up going to a writing conference in Santa Barbara, probably about 10 years ago, I guess. And John Cleese was the keynote speaker, and he really talked about opening creativity. And then I went to a breakout section with a woman, her name was Dara Marks, who wrote a book called Inside Story about screenwriting. And I had no intention of writing a screenplay, but I liked her transformational arc. It fit with my psychological background. And so started playing with that idea for a story that I had kind of rumbling through me. And it had started with a character. And so I felt stuck, though. I tried writing it as prose. It wasn't going anywhere. I was ready to give up. And then I started seeing images like a movie, and I'm a big movie buff too. And so I thought, what the heck? And I got a book on screenwriting, and I got some screenwriting software. And this book was actually first written as a screenplay.
Nice. Talk a little bit about that. It's rare that something begins as a screenplay and then evolves into a novel. Usually it's the other way around. Why do you think screenwriting was a good introduction for you? Is it just because you were already tuned to that type of storytelling with a love of movies, and so that just seemed natural? Why do you think you started there? And then what did moving this to a novel do for your storytelling?
So I think some of what you said is right on, that, I loved movies. I loved thinking in that way. But I think that as I think about it in retrospect, it really helped me learn dialogue, and it really helped me learn to show rather than tell, because you can't tell in a screenplay. You really have to be showing. And so both of those things, it was a real positive learning tool for me. I don't have an educational background in writing, in fiction writing. So it really taught me those things. I think it sort of forced me to learn to show and to articulate dialogue in a realistic way.
So it began as a screenplay, evolved into a novel. But what came to you first? Was it the characters? Was it the setting? Did Sarah come to you fully formed, or kind of how did the story evolve with you?
So it was definitely the character, and I'm finding I have a second novel that I'm doing a rewrite on now, and it was the same way. So the characters seem to come to me first, and I get to know them. And so I had Sarah's character and also the beginnings of a story. I knew that the story for me was going to be about healing. It was going to be about this arc, I've worked a lot with trauma victims, or just all of us have some traumas in our backgrounds. And so I knew it was about this woman who had these, early childhood experiences that had shaped her, and how that arc was going to unfold. So it was really the character. And I developed all the characters in the book. I like to get to know my characters. And so I actually sit with each one of them for a while, and what do they like to do, and what do they like to eat, and what is their favorite color, and all of that.
We talk about that there are two primary skills that a writer really needs to work hard on to be a good writer. And, it goes that you have to read a lot, and you have to write a lot. You have to just go through the motions of doing it to get better at it. And like Anne Lamott says, give yourself permission to write really crappy first drafts, and
exactly,
and it's just the working at it that makes you get better. I think there's actually a third thing that all great writers really need to do, and that's spend time with people and watching people, listening to people, not only just to understand kind of the cadence of dialogue and how people interact with each other, but just watching people, how they behave, how they interact with others. I think a writer, if we're all telling stories about the human condition, and I think we are, no matter what genre it's wrapped in, we're all just talking about how we live with one another, then you need to kind of understand people a little bit. And as someone who worked as a nurse, and you were probably involved in one of the happiest moments in a lot of people's lives, you probably experienced some tragedy with some people as well, just statistically, I would think. But also working in psychology, how do you think these interactions with people and being at the place you were in their lives maybe gave you a unique outlook on people and the human condition?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that both these careers I draw from, but particularly the psychotherapy, being in that intimate space with another human being where they're sharing their lives with you in ways that they wouldn't with anyone else. And I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by how different we all are. And I want, I would love us to be able to embrace that more. I think that our differences really make for a richness of life. And I think that's some of what I try to convey in my writing is, that we're all different. We all react differently to things. And rather than judging, can we have compassion and curiosity about each other?
So we talked about that, the book Better Than This began with Sarah Jenkins, your main protagonist, and that you kind of lived with her for a little bit. What is Sarah's story, and how do we as readers meet her?
So Sarah is a young woman in her mid to late 20s who is married to a much older man, old enough to be her father, and boy, Hank, how to talk about this without giving too much away. And she has a past that we slowly start to see as the book unfolds, and her behavior from fairly early on, it's clear that there's something amiss in her marriage, and you start to see more of that as the book unfolds, and you also start to understand more of where Sarah's childhood brought her to this point as well.
When at what point did you know that this book was going to be the kind of book that it is? When you first met Sarah, did you kind of know all of her secrets and the things she was hiding, or did those things evolve and come out in the writing?
A lot of that evolved and came out of the writing, which was, as a fairly new writer, that was such an amazing and surprising process to me. As I said, I wrote this as a screenplay and then put it on the shelf for several years before I went back to rewrite it. And it became a very different, not a different story, but much more depth and much more evolved with the characters as I rewrote it. They took me in directions that surprised me. And that was such a cool process. I love that process. So I'm a bit of a pantser in that way. I really sort of let the characters take me. I know where I want to end up, but the middle is just letting it unfold. And that's been a really fun process for me.
When you're telling a story like this that has so much, there's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of darkness, honestly.
Right.
How do you, as the writer, there's a great balancing act that you have to get the gritty and the dark out. And you have to make this character compelling. We have to feel empathy for her. We have to be in the struggle with her. But then we need to have some sort of resolution for her, without it being trite and simplistic. When you're working through a story like this, how do you balance the darkness with the light, the tension with the resolution, without it just being, this could only happen in a novel. This is not how life works.
Yeah, it was challenging with this book, and I still wonder even now, did I make her too unlikable, or is it too dark for people? And the reviews so far have been, for the most part, very positive, and someone even wrote that, she loved it, that it was so real that she felt like a therapist could have written it. And then she found out I was a therapist. And so I'm really comfortable going into dark places with people, and, maybe underestimated that I was going to these dark places that might be harder for other people to go to. I don't know. But I was really aware of that in writing it. I wanted to really show the depth of how despairing it can be for someone in a situation like Sarah's, and at the same time not make this a downer of a book. And I tried to lighten it with her friends. She has two friends in the book, one who's particularly, quirky, colorful, and really tried to lighten it some with them. And they are her support system. They are what helps her through this difficult situation that she's in.
When you, how long did it take to write this book? From, I know it began as a screenplay. First off, how long have you been living with this story, with this character, and, how much of your life has this taken up?
That's a very good question. It's I would say probably close to 12 years. I finished the screenplay 10 years ago. So the story had been living with me for a little while before I wrote that. And then again, put it on the shelf, and then came back to it. So yeah, 12 years.
How long was the writing of the novel?
The novel itself, when I took it from the screenplay, I just literally took it from the screenplay software, plugged it into a Word document, and started rewriting. And I spent probably about a year and a half on that process. Many revisions. I probably did 7, 8 revisions of it before I was ready to show it to somebody.
Right. Well, what was the process like for showing it to someone? You know, when you've lived with a story that's this deep and this powerful, and you know, there's this great gift that first time authors have, and that gift is that no one knows that you're writing this. Usually, maybe there's a couple of close family members, maybe a friend, but for the most part, you get to live with the story all by yourself and these characters, and you get to work on it and work on it. Now, after you publish that first book, the second one is a whole different ball game. You know, there's expectations and all of this stuff that goes with it. But when you're working on a book like this and you've got that year and a half, when do you know that it's finished?
I'm not sure that I had any point where I knew it was finished or I even thought about it being finished. I'll be honest with you. I sat with this for a long time thinking this is just about my personal process. This is just about me learning and growing personally through there were hard parts of the book to write, and I later could look back and say, oh, wow, I was, learning some part of myself in that. I'm a very private person. I'm an introverted person. The idea of putting this out into the world and being published was not something I was really thinking about. And then I got to a point, and a friend who did know I was writing it, she and I had kind of been writing partners, and she said, why are you spending all this time if you're not going to try and get this published? And I thought about that. And around that time, a local bookseller, I went to a Litquake event, and a local bookseller who is this bookstore is incredibly supportive of writers, and I belong to a writers group there, and they do a lot of conferences. And he did a workshop or just a little talk on the publishing world, just kind of an overview. And I thought, well, that would be good information for me to know because I know nothing about it. And so I went and listened to him talk, and everything from Big Five to self-publishing and everything in between. And it was a little overwhelming. And I wasn't sure I wanted to walk down that road, but it was good information and I was learning a lot. The one thing that he talked about was this idea of hybrid publishing being the way of the future, and his opinion. And, and it interested me. He talked specifically about She Writes Press, and I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting concept, but I didn't think more about it until a couple months later. I saw in the newspaper, we have this column every day, 4 things to do today. And the publisher of She Writes was actually speaking at this bookstore. And so I went, Brooke Warner, I went and listened to her speak, and I thought that might be a path for me. If I wanted it to be vetted, I didn't want to self-publish. I wanted to have someone who knew the book industry look at this and tell me yes or no. So I ended up submitting it to Brooke, and she loved it, and there we go.
Nice. And you've gotten some early reviews on the book. That first publishing, that first putting it out to the world, it is a scary thing when
yes,
the story has been all you and all yours for so long. How, as a first time author, do you kind of build yourself up to put your baby out there and come what may, this is the book. How do you deal with that?
It's been sort of a day-to-day process for me. I am, it's been helpful to have some positive reviews. the more negative reviews seem to be a way for me to be more clear about what I felt like I was intending with this book, that I really think about writing for my readers, and that this book would be an inspiration to some, or empower some, or comfort. And I've had that response that people will say, oh my God, my sister is going through this, or I went through this. And I saw a great quote recently, David Foster Wallace. He said, I probably won't get this exactly right, but that good fiction's job is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And I love that, because I think I was really thinking in terms of comforting the disturbed when I wrote this book, but I'm realizing it's also going to disturb the comfortable, that people who don't want to think about, domestic abuse, don't want to think about some of the darker aspects of, that this might, my hope is this would engender some empathy perhaps in people. I found that myself in writing the book, that there were times I wanted to just shake Sarah and say, come on, why are you putting up with this? And I realized that response in others is a positive thing, and to understand. I've worked with, I trained as a domestic violence advocate. I grew up with domestic violence. I've worked with so many women, and it's so much more challenging than people think. From the outside, it looks like, oh, I could just walk away. And it's so much more complicated than that.
Well, the domestic violence is definitely a thread in this book, and it's a part of the story. But what else is this book about? If someone may think, well, man, that's just too heavy for a Saturday beach read, or something, because it is heavy, heady stuff. But that's not her only story. What else would you tell someone that this book is about?
Well, I really see this book in a lot of ways as kind of a coming of age story, even though Sarah's mid to late 20s, but it's really about her coming into herself. It's about someone whose sense of self was shaky, not quite formed, that she's willing to abandon parts of herself in this marriage. And it's really about her. It's an exciting and empowering story to me, in that it's really about her coming into her own and really claiming her creative power. That was really what the book, yes, the domestic violence is part of it, but it's not a lot of physical domestic violence. It's more just, this power and control, and the way Sarah's given that up in a lot of ways, that she hasn't stood up to Robert in ways that maybe another woman would have. Yeah.
You mentioned, earlier about other people's perceptions of someone going through a situation like that. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because, sadly, I think we all know someone or know of someone who has been through a situation like that. And, a lot of times you're sitting at a dinner party or something, and everyone around knows what's going on, but no one will talk about it. And everyone just kind of shakes their head like, why would she keep going through this? Why would she not just knock the fool out of him and,
exactly.
go on? So, coming from a situation like that, where you have expertise in dealing with people like this, helping people like this, listening to people's stories, and now you're telling the story, what would you convey to people who have that attitude? Just the not understanding, and the maybe dismissing the situation because that's not the way we would handle it. What would you like to say to people that maybe not the abused per se, but those of us who witness it and can't empathize with that situation?
Yeah, I would say that there are so many complicating factors that we can't fully know from the outside until we, I think if we know someone going through that, much like Sarah's friends do in the book, Kate and Maggie, to start to recognize that and to be there for her. And they do try to, Kate particularly tries to address it some, but Sarah's resistant. So I think just being there as a friend, not abandoning the person, continuing to be present and to understand that this is a really hard thing and that love is mixed into it, that we can love someone that hurts us, or we can love and hate someone at the same time. And that it's really hard that in this cycle that people are in, the abusers are often very loving, charming people at times. And Robert had, we don't see a lot of that in him, but that piece is there. And Sarah gets glimpses of it now and then, and you hold on to that hope. And so it's really trying to help people understand, it's bigger than what we see from the outside.
Right. This is one of the reasons that fiction can be so powerful, is it allows us to see situations that we are familiar with but removed from. So we can understand the situation because we've seen it around us, yet we get to watch someone that we're not connected to deal with that situation. Do you feel like that there's a certain power in fiction that allows us to work things out vicariously through these characters that we meet in books?
Absolutely. I mean, that's my hope. I think in writing this, that's been my experience in reading. It's a longish quote and I don't have it memorized, so I can't say it here, but that's in a book that I love, A Novel Bookstore. And it's really about how some people think fiction is not important, and yet it really does allow, it really is that vehicle for us that literature really informs us, it instructs us, it prepares us for life. That for me as a kid growing up in a very chaotic household, it was my lifeline. I could read books and learn from them. I could see a life different than my own. And so in this book, I really tried to convey that with Sarah's inner voice. There is a inner dialogue of hers that runs through the book. And the idea that through that, letting the reader get inside Sarah's head might help engender that empathy, might help them understand a little bit how she ended up in the situation she's in.
Right. Well, Cathy, what a phenomenal job you've done with this book. It really gives us a character we can care about, and a story that we can hopefully can become part of our story as we get to live through this with Sarah. The book is called Better Than This. It's available everywhere now. And Cathy, if people are just learning about you and your work, where can they connect with you online?
So the easiest would be my website. It's just cathyzane.com, and all my social media links are there. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc.
Excellent. Cathy, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, thank you. It's been a real pleasure, Hank.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, child of the jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet. Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.